Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Before I get started, I'd like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcast space. Today's episode is part of the Culture Champions series, and we're here with Roxana Shershin from Digital Additive. Roxana, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you in. I'd love to hear a little bit about you and your company.
Sure. So I am a co-founder of Digital Additive. We are an email marketing services agency. But that's sort of a very broad statement, right? But what we're really specialized in is trying to drive home that idea of one-to-one marketing and really delivering on that promise by leveraging data and technology as well as creative to create that personalized experience for our customer.
Got it. And is there certain technology you like to use for that?
Yes, we're actually a Salesforce shop, so we do Salesforce Marketing Cloud as our primary vehicle for email and mobile messages, but we are agnostic in terms of what we need to plumb in to that platform to make those communications work.
Yeah, I'm sure with something as large as Salesforce and their cloud, you get all kinds of integrations from App Exchange, and data's coming from all different points to make those decisions.
Exactly, very much so.
Awesome. So let's start off with a little history. From a company culture perspective, what is one of the best cultures you worked in before? Of course, I'm sure Digital Additive is like your best one yet.
Of course.
But before that, what were some experiences that you went through that you really just enjoyed that stood out in your past?
Sure. So I've really been very lucky to have had a number of places to have worked that have been great. But one that comes to mind is I worked for CARE International, which is a large nonprofit organization. And the fact that it's a nonprofit aside, which of course has a sort of this esoteric do-gooder kind of vibe to it, what made the culture really unique for me was really based on that time and place. I started when they moved their headquarters from New York to Atlanta. So there was a huge cohort of us, and we all started at the same time. They had a number of staff members who moved from New York to Atlanta, and they were starting. So we were all kind of new to either Atlanta or new to the organization at the same time, and it created a real deep bond between everybody. And I think when you all start, it's kind of like freshman year in college, and you all hang out in the dorm together. And we worked crazy hours because we were effectively had to have no change in the day-to-day operations of the organization, but yet everyone still knew. So it was exciting, but I think culturally speaking, it was about those relationships, and some of my closest friends are still folks who I worked with during that time.
Got it. So what would you say is like some of the fundamental differences in nonprofit culture that you feel are, generally the ethos of those versus other companies, right? I know that's a broad generalization, but were there some standout items where it's like that mostly shows up in a nonprofit?
It's funny because I came from an ad agency to a nonprofit, and I had a huge expectation of, the culture is going to be completely different because everyone's there for the better good. And there's a little bit of that, but a company's a company. So it's funny because after you get past that initial piece that you're like, oh my gosh, we're doing so much great things. Culturally speaking, I don't know if there's anything hugely different. It was really all that relationship piece, and we had the teams I worked on were great because we had managers and directors who really cared about the folks. But just like with another company, if you had a manager, director who was about kind of checking the box or clocking in and clocking out, it had a different vibe and a different culture to it. So I don't think it was all that different.
Yeah, nothing stood out as truly.
Nothing.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, if anything, what stood out is because it's such a large organization, it was, again, more the size of it. It moved slower than my little ad agency I'd come from.
Gotcha.
So that kind of surprised me, but I think
that's a pretty common theme. That too. That speed is probably a common thing based on size, no matter what type of organization, right?
Exactly. And just I think speed and desire to push things through affects a culture. certainly, so that, we're coming from like a more nimble culture where people want to move really fast, and that creates a different vibe and energy. That certainly wasn't there, but I don't know if it was size or the nonprofit-esque or governmental. What
Right.
I can't tell you if that was really the fact that it was a nonprofit or if it just was big.
Yeah.
And big moves slower.
Or both, right.
Or both, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how does that play into like what you think about with Digital Additive now, where you were in a nimble, small agency? I don't know how big compared to Care, like relationally, but now that your business is growing, how does some of that factor into your psyche and how you're building the company?
Oh, it absolutely does.
Okay.
But what's so funny is I think even in the cultures that the companies that I've worked at before, I think also folks weren't very intentional. I don't know. I don't remember people talking about culture.
Yeah.
So it kind of was organic. It was whatever it was, and then you had like little subcultures. Like I even mentioned,
Right.
you had like a director who led his team a certain way, and that kind of spun off its own little subculture that may or may not have jived with the rest of the organization. But I do like the fact that, at least for DA and even a lot of my colleagues, we're actually talking about culture and being intentional about it as opposed to letting it happenstance evolve. So definitely, for us, one of our core values is about being nimble. And so we talk a lot about, like, from a cultural perspective, how can we maintain that even as we grow, or even as we work with, clients and companies that may not be as nimble. But how do we protect that part of our core value and also that part of the energy that I think that brings to bear for the culture as well.
Got it. So on the core value topic, how many core values you have?
Of course,
Okay.
I have 5.
Okay. I always have to, preference, like, do you know? Maybe I should ask you that before. But so out of the 5, which one is your favorite and why?
Oh, that's a good one. So I think my favorite, or the one that I tend to gravitate toward a lot, is genuine.
Okay.
Because it kind of, for us, genuine is a mixture of being, of course, the pay-to-play of being honest. We did not put honesty as a core value because that just is a presumption. A pay-to-play kind of value. But it's really genuine is being authentic and open and honest with each other of what we know and what we don't know, with each other and with our clients, and creating a sense of trust that evolves from that level of authenticity and being genuine. So it's something that I like to think is my own. I actually have personal core values.
Okay,
too. But it's also one of my They're not in my pocket. They're in my phone.
Card? Okay.
They're in my phone.
Okay.
But genuine's also a personal core value,
Got it.
and I just think it's to build a strong relationship. It kind of at its core is building that authenticity and trust that comes out of being genuine.
Yeah. Do you feel that since you're a co-founder, like your core values are really what kind of become the company core values, at least in the beginning, and then have they morphed from there because you added so many team members?
That's a really good question. So I have to admit I kind of did this backwards.
Okay.
In that we worked on our corporate core values probably about 2 years in. So we didn't do it from the get-go. And I'm glad we didn't, because it was just 3 of us sitting around a table in a co-working space. And I think we would have come up with something that just reflected the 3 of us. So we did it with the leadership team about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was through that exercise, and having been at other companies that had core values, they put them on placards.
Honesty.
Yes, and honesty is in there, like the pay to place. But I think in going through the exercise, I recognized that I hadn't really done, to think that an entity has core values first before I've even figured out what my personal core values. It was kind of like an aha moment. I was like, I don't have my own personal core values at some, early young age. Figured out. So I did it backwards, and it was interesting having gone through the core values of the organization with the leadership team, and then really working the language. We actually evolved as a whole agency. So everyone had input on what does SMART mean, because one of them is smart, and it's not just intellectually smart. It's about being innovative, but having folks really weigh in on what does that mean from a day-to-day perspective? Like, how does that actually translate into behavior as opposed to just words?
How does that get reinforced?
Exactly. Yeah. So I did it in reverse, and it's interesting having gone through my own personal core values. There's certainly, like I mentioned, genuine's a shared one, but they're not all shared.
Yeah.
So
what are some ways that you reinforce genuine as a core value within the organization?
A lot of it has to do with being open and trusting and honest with what you know and what you don't know.
Got it.
Especially when with email and anything digital, like there's this expectation that we can be fast and nimble. Like that's part of being nimble is because there's an expectation around it. And I think sometimes in a desire to be fast and please, we sometimes will ignore what we don't know and kind of just ram right through it. So I think from a day-to-day perspective, just being really making sure that people feel safe in being able to say, hey, wait, I'm not sure about this, or this is out of my comfort zone, I need help. And that's really where I think from a day-to-day perspective, encouraging people to feel safe that they can be open and honest on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's what came to mind for me was, feeling safe and being able to say you don't know and know that there's not some repercussion or judgment or whatever else it is.
Absolutely.
Like, hey, let's go find out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Do you find that leads to more inquisitiveness across people? Like they're able to say they don't know and they realize like maybe multiple people don't know. So there's opportunity there.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I'd like to think so. It's funny. I think when we hire a lot of folks out of college, and as much as college is such a learning, it's all about learning. There is a little bit of this fear to ask for, that oh wait, I should know this. There's this thought that I should know. And then you realize you really don't.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think it translates into a little bit more of that curiosity to find out. But I think what it really does evolve into is a lot more leaning on each other. And building that trust and saying, well, I don't know, but do you know? And then having sort of peer-to-peer learning or try to figure it out. But at least acknowledging it up front.
Yeah, so to be able to lean on each other and be trusting and genuine, you got to have a great team. So tell us, what is the team like at DA? What's the structure? Are you all in an office? You have remote people?
Yep. Yes. So we are about 43 people.
Okay.
And out of the 43, 10 are remote. And by remote, I mean remote, not just work from home. So we have a few folks in upstate New York. We have somebody in Chicago. We have someone in Nagano, Japan.
Yeah, cool.
We didn't necessarily hire him in Nagano, Japan. He was working for us in Atlanta and then moved to Japan. So we really work hard on trying to create I don't know if guardrails is the right, but just helping create some standards to help ensure that folks don't get disconnected. So every one of our huddle rooms and conference rooms are equipped with cameras and Google Meets, and we encourage everyone to always have their video on, because there is something to be said about connecting with somebody, face to face. Even if it's on video, there's just I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a pretty high percentage of communications through body language. I'm sure there's a study with an actual percentage. But even being able to engage at that level is really important because, for example, AJ, who's in Japan, he comes to the States once a year. So how to ensure that he's connected and engaged and feels that appreciation and that energy is really important.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't say it's a rule in our organization, but it's highly encouraged to always turn on your video, and I'll reinforce that by asking like, hey, are you turning on your video or should we wait a minute? Whatever it is to let people know, like, we expect to see you and build those relationships. I mean, it's even the same with the podcasts. Like, a lot of people do remote podcasts, and we have a few that we do remotely over the phone, but, being face to face just gives such a better experience, better, relationship and things like that. So it takes a little extra time, a little extra, coordination, but it works out.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, it makes a huge difference. In fact, it's funny, so many of our clients, they're big organizations, how many of them have yet to embrace video calls or video conferencing. And so we end up doing a lot of client calls, all just traditional conference call style. And it's a totally different experience. Like, you just really can get off the phone. I'm like, I don't know what happened. I don't know. You just feel like you're missing out on so much.
Yeah, something's happening in the room, but you can't see it. And they pause and people talk in the room. You can't hear the rest of it. Yeah, all kinds of weird things.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've noticed it. There is a difference. Like, I'll get on with some people and they'll already have their camera on, or I'll have my camera on because I let them know, like, hey, my camera's always on so we can talk. And they'll jump on and be like, oh, well, I didn't know we were going to do cameras. Well, yeah, turn it on if you're comfortable. Like, if you're able to, great. If not, no big deal. But even reinforcing that with clients, truly helpful to see what's going on, all that nonverbal communication, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. And it makes all the difference, especially with clients that are further. We have a client in LA, and we can't get out there as much as we'd like, but it makes all the difference to be able to do the face-to-face time. Yeah.
So before Digital Additive, what was one culture you experienced that you really didn't enjoy, that wasn't a fit for you, and why?
So, as I mentioned, I've been really lucky. Okay. Because I really, it's funny because even in building out DA, some decisions you make because you don't want to repeat mistakes, and some decisions you make because you want to reinforce the behaviors you enjoyed. And I think there are quite a few things from a cultural perspective. I think the one thing that we've really tried to work hard at is I'm trying to think of a good way to put it, but is to kind of avoid that traditional hierarchical vibe of the president, especially as we've grown, like the president is like in some sort of room and you only need to go to him or her when you have something very important to say or, problem to solve or whatever that is. So one of the things when we actually built out our offices, we specifically don't have offices. So it's all open space. Yeah. And you just pick where you want to sit for the day, which is great because we have a highly flexible work environment, so we don't have wasted space to have a desk for somebody who's only going to be there twice a week. Right. But what I think it enables is I actually physically sit at one of the big tables in the center of the office, and I'd like to think folks feel that I'm in it with them, right? And it's not just I'm kind of sat apart both physically and mentally and even emotionally, right? I know when somebody's having a really hard time, or if there's something going on and need a second opinion, I can be right there with them. And I think that gives a different culture, and there's less looking for approval as much as it is, I want to bounce something off of you. I have a thought, like what do you think about this, as opposed to, can you approve this, or can you do this? What would you do instead? Yeah, more of a collaborative feel. Yeah, like, I need to come to you to hear your share, your knowledge, your experience, and then we'll go make a decision. Yeah, it's a totally different type of conversation. Yeah. So we've had a few people on that talk about the culture of space and the different challenges of like the traditional office. Then we went all the way to this like super open office, some of the challenges from that. What have you found to be some of the challenges of having a very open office? I know it's all the rage these days, and it'll morph a little bit more over the years, but what's one or two challenges you've noticed? What is interesting is that just from a human psychology perspective,
Yeah.
Humans are creatures of habit. So we crafted the open space with this idea that people could sit with folks depending on the type of work you're doing. So if you're working on a project with Courtney today, you're going to sit with her and work on that. No, that actually doesn't happen.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a downside per se, but it's fascinating. People still sit in the same seats.
Yeah.
And people still sit with folks that they are most comfortable with. So I'm like the one, because I'm so intentional about it, I kind of rove around, and then every once in a while I move around, and one time I'll be like in the middle of like ops corner, and I'm like, hey guys, like, what are you doing here?
Do you like purposely take somebody's seat that sits there every day?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Got to shake it up, because that was the whole point, was to shake things up. So I think that's just a human psychology part of it is fascinating. I love psychology, so that's kind of fun in itself. But I think really it's more around people being able to take a personal phone call.
Yeah.
I think it's people have to walk outside, feel like they need to walk outside. So we are actually putting in some like single person call booths, kind of the old school telephone booth type of, but not really as claustrophobic as one, but similar. But putting places for folks to have that personal conversation. But I don't think it's been.
That's it. That's a big one.
And the other big one actually is it takes people a huge time. Folks who've been in traditional spaces for a longer period of time, like kind of mid-career, when they come on board, it's a shift for them. And you can tell they're like, what do I do? And even the fact that we have lockers and filing cabinets, but you're not like leaving your family photos on the desk or anything. So I think it's really more that adjustment for folks who join us sort of mid or senior kind of positions. It takes them a minute to figure it out.
I have to ask, did you like notice the reaction of the person the first time you kind of stole their seat? And what was it?
I'm now known for it, so I'm trying to think. I don't
like
the
originally
first time I did it.
Yeah. Once you're known for it, it's just,
see now I think that it was obviously kind of taken as a joke, and now that's just what I'm known for.
Right. Okay. So you don't remember the first reaction?
I don't remember. I actually really don't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I feel like we had some taunting at one of the companies that I worked for, where somebody bought a brand new car, a brand new BMW, and they would park very far out in the lot. Okay. And so two of the gentlemen decided that they were going to park on both sides, and no matter, like, he would go to lunch and they would go outside and move their car.
The cars just to make it. Oh, that's awesome.
I was like, I don't know if that's harassment or funny, but I mean, I think it's kind of funny, but anyways. Yeah, so a little bit like that.
Yeah.
A little more friendly. Because you know who it is, at least. This was a large company.
Yes.
You didn't know who it was.
Yes, yeah. So, and this is, and my intention is really just to kind of get a feel for what's going on. And because really that's the whole point of having done the open office, is to feel, for me, connected is one of my other personal core values, but to feel connected with everybody in the agency is really important to me. So being able to sit with different folks and just get different perspectives and different feeling for how things really are going is really helpful.
Yeah. Totally random thought, but since you said the psychology of it, it almost makes me wonder, like, why people picked the desk that they did, and then, like, did they try other ones before they settle, or like, what does that really look like when you all are in one space and they're all the same? There are
definitely some Goldilocks folks who like go and try a bunch of different seats, and then they settle. And so there's definitely.
But they all eventually settle.
Settle.
Got it.
So unless they're really, and it goes back to that whole idea of intentionality. Like, unless you really make that intention, then just it's interesting to see how just human behavior is fairly driven to routine.
Oh yeah.
And comfort.
I feel like it's one less thing you have to think about, though. Yes. It's like, oh, I like that shirt. I'm gonna buy 3. Blue ones and a similar stitching, and I don't have to think about it in the morning,
Absolutely. I do the same. I mean, everyone does the same thing. But
to some degree.
To some degree, yes. And I think there is something to be said about, like, at least I know what's going to happen today. I have some pieces that I can say, this is going to happen. I know where I'm going to sit. I know who's going to mostly be around, and I get that. I absolutely get that.
Yeah,
so we don't make people move around.
Yeah, you don't force them to, unless you sit in their seat.
No, well, and then no.
I like it. It's fun. It's definitely a fun way to do it.
Yeah.
What else around? So you mentioned you had maybe, I guess, a fourth of your company's remote. Mm-hmm. What are some of the challenges that you have to overcome from that? So you mentioned like turning on the video, getting that face-to-face time. Somebody comes in once a year. People on the state side probably come in a little more often. What are some other challenges that you've overcome to really help that team build a bond?
Yeah. And honestly, I can't say we've solved it. And I'll be completely the first person to say that it still requires a lot of work. So, for example, we do a lot of activities in the office. We have, monthly birthday celebrations. We have breakfast brought in once a week and lunch brought in. So we try to do things that encourage some interaction beyond just working. Even we do some volunteer projects, things like that. So how to get those remote folks to kind of build that rapport outside of just the work is a challenge, to be honest.
Yeah.
So whenever folks do come in town, we really make a point to do a big, outing with groups together. So we actually have some people from upstate New York in town this week, and we are involved with the AMA Amy Awards. So they're all part of the, we got a table, and they're all at the table with a bunch of other folks from the agency to go out and just get to do something together and, just build that bond outside of just the work talk.
Yeah, so go a little bit bigger when they come in intentionally.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then even, for some other things, I know we've done where we might do a big, not big, but a quarterly event with a lot of folks. We'll actually send something to everybody who's remote that, kind of plays along the theme. Like we did a big Braves game outing, and those who couldn't make it in, we sent them sort of like a baseball-esque themed package. So, they did, they know that was happening, obviously, but they could at least, we could at least telegraph to them that we're thinking of them and hope they're enjoying some time, downtime of not being bothered by everybody else for that hour.
Definitely.
But yeah, just trying to come up with ways to still make them know that they're being appreciated and connected, even if they can't be physically there.
Yeah, you definitely have to put in the extra effort to make people feel like they're not left out because they're remote. Because I know I've worked within companies where it's like everything seems to happen at the headquarters, and it's nice to be remote. And some people even look at it. The company, I've talked to founders that say, "Well, that's the benefit. Like your benefit is not that you get these things we do. Your benefit is that you don't have to sit in traffic." And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't really help like camaraderie. You know, it feels a little short-sighted.
Yeah. Because that's such a technicality, whereas really ultimately what makes people stay or what makes people leave is typically related to the relationships that you have, and ultimately that's what kind of culture is. It's all about like relationships. So I mean, commuting is not
a relationship. It's a relationship with your car.
It's a technicality, it's something very yes, exactly. Yeah. So I agree with you 100%. That's kind of like it's a benefit, but it's not really it's not going to be what makes or breaks your level of connection.
Yeah, and I like sports cars, so I have a special relationship with cars. I enjoy them, but sitting in Atlanta traffic has nothing to do with it.
No one has a relationship with that.
It's more like mountain run, curvy roads, fun times.
Right,
exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned themes for like the Brave game. What other ways do you inject themes into the business?
So, and we started doing this probably after we did the core values. We really started, I think, through that exercise with everybody in the agency. We have, of course, a vision statement and a purpose and all that good stuff. But I think folks wanted to have. I know it's a buzzword to call it North Star, but have like a theme that kind of anchors what we're doing for the year. So we do have like kind of an annual theme.
Okay.
Of what we're doing that kind of anchors everything else. So like this year, we talk a lot about delivering on the promise of one-to-one marketing. So this year our theme is called delivering on our promises. So, really kind of working on defining delivering on the promise of one-to-one is like really big.
Right.
But what does that mean in terms of like, what is what does a promise mean for me? What does my promise look like? Is going to be different than somebody who is working on Carter's emails today, right? And working on what those promises are and acknowledging what each other is bringing to the table has been our theme this year. Because to fulfill the overall promise of DA is really our ability for each one of us to fulfill our own personal promise.
Yeah, so for something as broad as a promise, I mean, are you having to then also kind of inject some training around like what is a promise, a verbal, you have explicit, implicit, like verbal, nonverbal. I mean, there's all kinds of ways I think somebody can almost convey a promise without making a promise in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And set an expectation for a customer, a colleague, whatever it is. So
yes.
What about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you have to be careful because you also the intention was not to make it like a pledge or oath, right? Like I pledge to DA or so we've actually developed we crafted some workshops where we break off into small groups and we just work on like what does it mean to have a promise and how can you develop something that also helps you fulfill your goals and sets you up for success, and what does that look like, and allowing everybody to have the space to find what that means for them without judgment but find their why.
Yeah.
Right? Essentially, that's really ultimately what we're kind of trying to do is help everyone find that why, but let that be the why they've crafted, not the why that's been dictated from the outside in.
Got it. Have there been any surprises from it so far? Where
I
didn't expect this to happen, or
the
good or bad?
Surprises that I've perhaps seen is just, and it's not even a surprise, is just how little we as a society don't do much self-reflection, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think about it. I developed my personal core values at the age of 45, right? Like this idea of self-reflection and really trying to think of your why as something that you craft or drive is kind of new. And in fact, I think I had a couple of people come out of a workshop saying, I don't think it was just 2 hours. It's like, I don't think I've given this that much thought before or been encouraged to give it that much thought. So I think that's been encouraging and a little surprising, but not really at the same time, because I guess I kind of knew that. No one ever asked me why I was at CARE or
definitely.
And I don't know if I ever gave it that much thought.
I think it's an impactful session to do. I know we do a Your Why exercise for clients and facilitate those, and we do it internally with our team members. We get new ones, we facilitate that as well. And like the amount of depth that comes out of it, people have to put some time into it, and we always set the tone by having somebody really open up from the executive team and read their why, and then give the other people time to go fill theirs out and come back and then share. And I mean, a lot of it is kind of a little bit of a look of exasperation, like, wow, that took a lot of work. I didn't really think about that. And it's like, what are you looking to do? 1, 3, 5 years? Why are you here? Why are you at the company? Why do you need the money? Why do you need to go to work? What is it going to pay for? Like, go deeper. What's the need for that? Whether it's your family, taking care of people. And we hear all kinds of amazing stories that we would have never known without doing that exercise.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. And ours is nowhere near that deep. It's, admittedly, it's at a very high level, but I think you're absolutely right. It's just even asking people to give their input as opposed to always saying, this is the goal that we're trying to hit, right?
Yeah.
I think people are excited by that. I know I would have been, especially coming out of college, having the opportunity to think through that earlier. I don't know if it would have made different decisions, but might have. Yeah.
Might have given you a little clarity somewhere. Yeah, exactly. Right, on one item that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So last question I have is, for the rest of the year, what are you most looking forward to enhancing in your company culture?
I think really what we're trying to do is really work on just more opportunities to build out relationships. So really trying to, as we grow, because I think we were like 30 36 or 37 people last year. We're at 43. We expect to be around like 50 or 52 before the end of the year. So with that growth, how do we maintain and protect relationships and continue to cultivate and build them is really important. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what that looks like, as opposed to just more parties, because you can have more parties. But we're really looking at how do we develop. A lot of folks want to do more community volunteerism, so really kind of crafting a more planful way of doing, volunteer projects and getting folks more involved in that, and just trying to make sure we protect that piece of it so that we still feel there's a little bit of a family-esque vibe that we have from a cultural perspective. I mean, part of that is because everyone's kind of sitting around a big table.
Right.
And how can we protect that as we continue to grow will be really important. But I think ultimately it's everyone feeling like everyone has each other's back. Yeah. Is super important. So making sure we're always having activities that support that.
Yeah, make sure to enhance and continue those relationships as you grow and see great success.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being on the show.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Fun. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.